In the spring of 1942, somewhere near the Iranian city of Hamadan, a small Syrian brown bear cub changed hands for a very modest price: some canned meat, a little money, and perhaps a few cigarettes. The buyer was not a family looking for a pet. It was a group of Polish soldiers who had only recently been released from Soviet labor camps after more than 2 years of forced labor in Siberia and the far north. These men were part of what would soon become the Polish. The Second Corps, an army in exile formed under British command. In 1939, Poland had been invaded from both sides by Nazi Germany in the west and the Soviet Union in the east. Hundreds of thousands of Polish soldiers and civilians were deported to gulags. When Germany attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941, Stalin signed an agreement with the Polish government in exile that allowed the release of these prisoners so they could form a new Polish army to fight the Germans. But freedom came with almost nothing. The men were weak, malnourished, dressed in rags, and many had lost entire families. They were told to make their way south through the deserts and mountains to British-controlled areas where they could be re-equipped and trained. Along that long, uncertain road, they bought the cub. At first he was so small he could fit inside a soldier's helmet. They named him Wojtek, a traditional Polish name that roughly means joyful warrior or one who smiles in battle. No one planned to keep him long. They just couldn't leave him behind. The soldiers fed him condensed milk from empty ration tins, mashed up bread soaked in tea, and whatever scraps they could spare. He slept curled up among the blankets in their tents or trucks. When the column moved, he rode in the back of a lorry or sat on someone's lap in the cab. As the months passed and the unit moved from Iran into Iraq, then Syria and Palestine, Wojtek grew rapidly. By late 1942, he was no longer a cub, but a young bear weighing well over 100 pounds. He walked on his hind legs like the men, wrestled with them on the ground, always gently, never with claws and ate from the same mess tins they did. He developed a taste for beer when the soldiers shared their rations, holding the bottle in both paws and drinking like one of them. He even took cigarettes, placing them between his lips and letting someone light them for him, then puffing contentedly. The soldiers treated him like one of their own. They taught him to salute by raising a paw when an officer passed. They let him march beside them during drills, standing upright and stepping in time. When the unit rested, he would sprawl in the shade of a truck or roll in the dust, drawing laughter from men who had seen little to smile about in years. For these exiled Poles who had lost homes, families, and entire years to captivity, Wojtek became something irreplaceable. A living reminder that life could still hold warmth and loyalty, even in the middle of war. By early 1943, the Polish Second Corps had been reorganized and re-equipped under British command in the Middle East. Wojtek was no longer a novelty. He was family. The men of the 22nd Artillery Supply, company mostly gunners, drivers, and loaders, had come to rely on his presence. He slept in their tents, shared their meals, and followed them on every move. When the unit drilled or marched, Wojtek would stand upright and step in time beside them, drawing smiles from even the sternest sergeants. He learned to salute by raising a paw when an officer approached, a trick the soldiers taught him with treats and laughter. In the hot deserts of Iraq and Palestine, he would flop into any available shade, tongue-lolling, while the men worked on vehicles or cleaned their rifles. At night, he curled up near the fire, a living blanket for whichever soldier was cold. When the Corps received orders to ship out for the Italian campaign in late 1943, the problem arose. Army regulations prohibited animals on troop transports. The officers discussed what to do. Leaving him behind was unthinkable. Someone suggested enlisting improperly. The company commander agreed. Wojtek was given a rank, brevet along with a serial number and an official The paperwork was filled out in all seriousness, stamped and filed. From that moment, he qualified for rations, medical care if needed, and a spot on the ship manifest. The men joked that he was the only soldier who never complained about the food. The voyage to Italy was uneventful for Wojtek. He stayed below decks much of the time, though the sailors let him up for air when it was safe. He adapted quickly to the rocking of the ship, sprawling on the metal floor and watching the men play cards or write letters home. When they landed in southern Italy, the Second Corps joined the Allied advance up the peninsula. The fighting was fierce: mountains, narrow valleys, well-dug German positions. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company was attached to heavier guns, hauling ammunition and supplies through mud and under shell fire. The decisive moment came in May 1944, during the Battle of Monte Cassino. The ancient monastery atop the hill had been bombed to ruins, but the Germans still held the high ground with interlocking fields of fire. The Polish Corps was given the task of capturing the objective in the final assault. The artillery had to fire almost continuously to soften the defenses, and that meant keeping the guns supplied with shells, day and night. The 105mm howitzers needed crates of ammunition brought forward from the trucks parked some distance back over rough ground, through dust clouds and occasional mortar bursts. The soldiers worked in teams, 2 or 3 men to a crate, straining under the weight. Wojtek watched them from the edge of the position. One day he simply walked over, stood on his hind legs, took a crate in his front paws the way he had seen the men do, and started walking toward the guns. The loaders froze. Wojtek delivered the crate, set it down carefully, then turned and went back for another. He did not flinch at the explosions or the whine of incoming shells. He kept going back and forth, crate after crate, for hours. The men said he carried more in one stretch than any pair of soldiers combined. He never dropped a single one. When the guns paused, I sat nearby panting but alert, waiting for the next load. The story spread quickly through the Polish lines. Men who had been grim and exhausted began to smile again. Wojtek's simple, steady work became a small miracle amid the destruction. After Monte Cassino fell and the Corps pushed north, he stayed with them until the German surrender in Italy. He was promoted to corporal in recognition of his service, though the paperwork was mostly for morale. To the soldiers, he was never just a mascot, he was one of them, loyal and unbreakable when it mattered most. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the Polish II Corps was sent to Scotland for demobilization. The men had fought from Iran to Italy, and now they faced an uncertain future. Many could not return to Poland. The country was now under Soviet control, and the new communist government viewed the exiles as enemies. For the soldiers, saying goodbye to each other was hard enough. Saying goodbye to Wojtek was impossible. Arrangements were made quietly. In 1946, after the unit was officially disbanded, Wojtek was taken to the Edinburgh Zoo. The handover was emotional. The men who had raised him from a cub stood at the enclosure, watching as he explored the new space. He recognized their voices, immediately stood on his hind legs, paw raised in the old salute, and let them scratch behind his ears one last time. Some of the soldiers cried. They promised to visit, and many kept that promise. Wojtek lived at the zoo for the next 17 years. He grew into a large adult bear, over 6 feet tall on his hind legs and weighing nearly 500 pounds, but he never lost his gentle nature with people he knew. Former comrades came regularly, bringing cigarettes and bottles of beer, just like old times. The zookeepers allowed it, knowing the history. Wojtek would sit up, take the cigarette carefully in his paw, and puff contentedly while the men talked to him and polished through the bars. Children at the zoo watched in wonder, and word spread. Newspapers wrote about the Polish soldier bear, and visitors came from across Britain and even from Poland when they could travel. He remained healthy until old age slowed him down. On December 2nd, 1963, at the age of 21, Wojtek died peacefully in his enclosure. The zoo received hundreds of letters from around the world, many from veterans who had served with him, others from people who had grown up hearing the story. His passing was marked quietly, but his memory endured. In the decades since, Wojtek has become a symbol far beyond the battlefield. Statues of him stand in Poland and Scotland. One in Krakow shows him carrying a shell crate. Another in Edinburgh Zoo remembers him with a simple plaque. Books have been written about him, including Eileen or Ese Wojtek, the Bear, Polish war hero, based on interviews with surviving soldiers. A children's animated film and several documentaries keep his story alive. For Poles in exile and their descendants, he represents something deeper than a mascot. Loyalty that crossed borders and wars, a reminder that even in the darkest years, companionship and small acts of care could survive. Wojtek never fought with a rifle or understood the politics that scattered his human family across continents. He simply stayed with the men who saved him, worked beside them when they needed help, and gave them something to smile about when everything else had been taken away. In the end, that was enough.